Shalom everyone, this is Daniel from Netivyah. This is going to be a little more casual because I don't have my whole team with me, but let's continue talking about Syria. Since we last talked, which was on July 16th, I guess it was aired on July 17th, but I prepared my text and material on July 16th, I believe 3 p.m. is when I finished. So since then, also on July 16th, continuing the timeline of events in Syria, Israel bombed the Syrian Defense Ministry in Damascus, in their equivalent of the Pentagon. And the Druze in Israel are protesting and striking and preparing by the thousands to go into Syria to aid their brethren. Syrian sources released a video of Druze executed while recovering in hospitals. That is, execution of wounded and sick within hospitals in hospital garb, shot dead. Now, French news says that the EU delegates insist that Israel stop attacking in Syria. Obviously, Europe wants the 14 million Syrian refugees to leave Europe and go back to Syria, and they won't let a little thing like massacres of minorities to get in the way. They want the butcher to stabilize Syria regardless of the cost, so they can encourage Syrians to go home. The UN President Antonio Guterres, who is a well-known anti-Semite and friend of the not dearly departed and not lamented Yasser Arafat, is condemning Israeli airstrikes and deployment in the Golan. Now, why would anyone think that a bad gentleman like that, to quote the Ugandan president in his speech of 10 years ago-ish, if anyone wants to watch, it's hilarious, would condemn massacres and kidnapping of Druze when he hasn't a chance to attack Israel? The UN Security Council has received a request to convene on the matter, but I have not yet heard the results of that meeting, if it happened yet. I haven't heard any more about it. Now, Chachmat al-Hajri, the spiritual leader of the Druze in Syria, said on July 16th, there is no ceasefire and no negotiation. We don't negotiate with armed gangs that call themselves the Syrian government. We continue to fight until the full liberation of the lands of the Asweda district. And the military council of Asweda does not recognize the treaty that Sheikh Jarboua with the Syrian government. He made a treaty a few days ago, and also 2 months ago in the past, he was very much in favor of the Syrian government. So the military council at Asweda says that this Sheikh Jarboua does not represent them. Now, moving on to July 17th, the Syrian president Mahmoud Ashara said that a ceasefire was reached and blamed Israel for causing chaos in Syria. He claimed that the Zionist entity, note the phrasing that has been used by years by the enemies of Israel, used for years by the enemies of Israel, has been causing internal strife since the fall of the Assad regime and wants to turn Syria into a zone of anarchy and divide it. We're going to hear more about that near the end. Sunni supporters of the Syrian government are preparing to aid the Bedouins against the Druze. There are reports of columns of Sunni fighters making their way to Asweda. Syrian forces say that Israeli drones attacked Bedouin fighters in the village of Wallah in the northeastern Asweda, resulting in injuries and casualties. Now moving on to July 18th. We're slowly making our way to today. On July 18th, there are reports of 50 to 70,000 fighters from the Arab tribes all over Syria preparing to battle for Asweda. Part of them have already moved and reached the entrance of the district. Now, this is a group of 41 tribes that have called for the mass recruitment of their armed forces. Another report. Footage is being released of al-Jolani's jihadists embedding themselves within those Sunni forces and within the Bedouin tribes in order to allow for Jolani the new president, to have plausible deniability of all these massacres. I mentioned at the end of last video that this is probably a false flag operation where Jolani's forces, and Jolani is encouraging, in addition to his forces, the Bedouins to attack the Druze, either just to destroy them, easily, simple, or to cause enough violence that he can then claim to go in order to make order and make peace. But it is a false flag operation because he's the one initiating it. Anyways, the Lebanese paper Al Maidan reported that Defense Minister Marhaf Abu Kasra was killed in the attack on the defense ministry that we mentioned earlier, and that Al-Jolani and his family, as well as the new defense minister, fled to Turkey. Now, I haven't heard any more reports on it since July 18th, so I don't expect that they're accurate, but I'm putting it out there for you guys. Take it as it is. The paper is pro-Hezbollah, pro-Iran, anti-Jolani, so take that into account as well. An additional report from the same paper stated that the internet and electricity were cut off in the Asveda district. Now moving on to July 19th, the spiritual leaders of the Druze in Syria said on their Facebook page that they are demanding international forces defend them and are accusing the Bedouins of breaking the ceasefire, which 2 days ago they had denied existed, and that the guaranteeing countries of said ceasefire need to be responsible for implementing it. And this is from Hikmat al-Hajri, who was the one who 2 days ago denied the existence of the ceasefire and that they won't negotiate. Anyways, Israeli Health Ministry is preparing to transport medical gear and medicine to the hospitals in Asveda after reports of the hospitals being attacked and bombed and executions in them, so on and so forth. Earlier, I started by saying that the Druze in Israel are preparing to go help their brethren, so there is a report of over 2,000 Israeli Druze who serve in Israeli security apparatus and are preparing and gearing up to go to Syria to protect their Druze brethren. Now, another sheikh from Asveda is calling on Israel to annex Asveda, saying that Israel is a democracy that respects all religions and minorities, that the Druze no longer see themselves as Syrians and want to fully integrate into Israel. Now, this is a relatively odd statement considering that overall, we've spoken about this in the past, the Druze are a people, a nation that are quite loyal to whatever country they are in. But under the circumstances, when they're being assaulted by the government, it's somewhat understandable that they no longer feel loyalty towards the Syrian government. A Sky News report shows looters taking everything they can from embattled homes in Asveda. Bicycles, refrigerators, agricultural tools, even pets are being taken. Somewhat reminiscent of October 7th. On July 20, this is moving on another day. By the way, you'll have to forgive the annoying fly that's in here with me. He's my pet. But anyways, on July 20, Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, released a call for saying that the rape and slaughter of innocents in Syria has to end. It's quite different than the European Union and UN calls 2 days earlier, saying that if the authorities in Damascus want to achieve a unified, peaceful Syria from ISIS and Iranian control, they must end this terrible situation and hold accountable those that did so, even from within their own ranks. Well, we shall see what happens. More on July 20th. The Bedouin tribes call for their forces to withdraw from Asweda district, according to Syrian news agency Sana. I don't know. Syrian Center for Human Rights reported over 1,000 died this week in the clashes between the Druze and Syrian governments, between the jihadists, and some civilians as well were killed. Now, as of July 21st, the number's already gone up to 1,100. There was a very cold and apathetic report from the Qatari Al Arabi broadcast. There was a live report, a live broadcast as Druze women and children were being kidnapped by Bedouins. The reporter was interviewing a Bedouin in the front of a vehicle, while in the back he had women and children being held prisoner. When the reporter began speaking with the women in the back, he received a signal from the offices of his channel to cut the interview short and change the subject. As usual, when it does not involve Israel and the Jews, the world turns a blind eye to everything, like they did with the Yazidis who were tortured and captured and sold as sex slaves by ISIS. So far, there are reports of 70 women and 50 children being kidnapped. A large column of Red Cross vehicles was seen today headed to Asveda. Let's hope they can provide some help to those suffering. This is on July 21st. The Greek City Times reported that the Greek Orthodox Archbishop of Basra, Huran Jabal al-Arab, the mountain of the Arabs, and the Golan made a desperate plea for international intervention to stop what he called the war of destruction against the Christian and Druze communities in Sveda. There's a very interesting report out of Lebanon. Viam Wahab, a Druze leader known for supporting Hezbollah and the Assad regime, was being interviewed on Lebanese TV and went on a rampage against Ashara, saying that if not for Netanyahu, Ashara would capture all of Syria, and portrayed Israel's action as critical to the survival of the minorities in Syria and Lebanon, saying that since he wants to protect his people, his tribe, what he has to do is work with Israel, and the old alliances have crumbled when faced with such an existential threat as Mahmoud Ashara al-Jolani. That's very interesting. Israeli Druze leader Muafq Tarif addressed Donald Trump, asking that the U.S. protect the Druze minority from the atrocities that the extremists are committing. We are seeing horrific scenes of evil against innocent Druze, and the U.S. is enabling this by turning a blind eye. This message he sent via the U.S. ambassador in Israel, Mike Huckabee. Now, recent reports are coming out of the Kurds in Syria expressing concern for their safety after the Druze massacres. A moment ago we mentioned the Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Church, and now the Kurds. I wonder who's next. And in response to this, Turkey, who backs Mahmoud Ashara's HTS and the new Syrian regime, expressed a similar concern as to what Mahmoud Ashara himself said, but they say that they're concerned that the Kurds in northern Syria will take advantage of the chaotic situation and claim more autonomy from Syria. The paper Asharq al-Awast said that Turkey is considering military intervention in northern Syria against the Kurds if they do not disarm and integrate themselves into the new Syrian government. They add, this is what Ashara mentioned earlier on July 16th, they add that they believe that Israel is sowing chaos in Syria in order to cause it to break apart into smaller, weakened states. Now, honestly, I can't say that I blame them for thinking that, because I hope and pray that that's what Israel is doing, and I hope and pray that that's the result, that Syria becomes a federal state of autonomous zones, Alawite zone, Kurd zone, Druze zone, and so on. But in any case, I don't know if that's what will happen. I don't know if that's is the goal, but frankly, I think that would be good for Israel, and probably also for the Syrian minorities. But anyways, finally, let's move on for a little bit out of Yemen. There's so much to talk about, but a little bit out of Yemen. CENTCOM reported that the Yemeni government intercepted and captured a shipment of weapons from Iran to the Houthis. And an interesting detail is that the instructions that came with the weapons were in Farsi, in Persian, meaning that the Iranians are there on the ground helping them. Another report, a couple days later, from the U.S. Embassy in Yemen said that the Yemeni government caught 16,000 Houthi-produced Coptagen pills on their way to Saudi Arabia, and that this catch the vital move to counter the Houthi drug trafficking and financing of their terrorist activities. Now, this is worth mentioning because it hasn't been in the forefront of the news, but the situation in Yemen for the last few years is that there is two Yemens. There's the Yemen that's controlled by the Houthis and the Yemen that's controlled by the Saudi-backed legal government of Yemen. And the Houthis have, for the last few years, been the more dominant force in the country. But recently, after the Iranian-Israeli war, that situation seems to be slightly changing. Hopefully, the legal Yemeni government will be able to retake the country, but we will see. And as always, there is so much more to report, but our time is limited. So hopefully we'll get more later this week. And please comment, like, share, subscribe, do all of that stuff that you guys can do, and pray for Israel, pray for its soldiers, its leadership, and of course the hostages. So shalom from Daniel at Netivyah. God bless.